All right, now in this video we want to move on and talk about why common experience verifies how we have interpreted Scripture and the teaching of the great theologians. That is to say, common experience, at least as it seems to suggest that most people die in a state of mortal sin. And we know that that is a dogma of the faith, that those who die in a state of mortal sin will go to hell. And it seems like most people die that way. That's the point here. Now, it is a fundamental principle of reason, I want to say this up front, that we should accept that things are the way they seem to be unless there is good reason to think otherwise. Now, I want to say that again, and I want you to think about it. It's a fundamental principle of reason. If you deny this, you would deny your whole ability to reason entirely. Okay? But it's a fundamental principle of reason that we should think that things are the way they seem to be unless there is good reason to think otherwise. That's a fundamental principle that we're going to kind of employ here. Actually, it's employed anytime you reason, pretty much, but especially here, because we'll see why when we get into this later on. The point is here is that when you consider just the list of mortal sins, we do have definitive teaching on sins that remove sanctifying grace from your soul. And when you consider that list and look at the world, it seems like most people not only commit these sins, but they seem to die in that state. Take, for example, the sin of lust. A recent Barna study showed that most men, 64% in fact, and it's the same for Christians and non-Christians, there's no difference there, 64% of men view pornography on a monthly basis. So think about that. That's a huge number. 64% of men watch pornography on a monthly basis. But as Jesus Christ taught, when you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. So at least for married men, 64%, most married men are committing adultery according to the words of Jesus on a monthly basis. That is a mortal sin. On a monthly basis, most men are doing this, at least most married men. And of course, you got the whole problem with the unmarried men watching it in terms of lust and fornication as well. But nevertheless, most men commit this sin according to the Barna study. Also, speaking of adultery, a recent survey showed that 74% of married men and 64% of married women say they would have an affair if they knew they could never get caught. That is a huge number. Most men and most women who are married would have an affair if they knew their spouse wouldn't find out. That's a huge number. And just this idea of a I would if I could mentality. Clearly, that is lust in the heart. That's what Jesus Christ was talking about. And can it be said, honestly said, that these people who would commit adultery if they could get away with it, if their spouse wouldn't find out, can it be said that these people have the charity of God in their hearts? I don't see how. I don't see how. More things we can consider. Divorce and remarriage. Jesus Christ said, everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. So think about all the divorce and remarriage rates going on nowadays. Jesus Christ said this was adultery. So another serious sin that removes sanctifying grace from your soul and puts you in a state of damnation. And think about all the other mortal sins we could talk about that are very common in our society. Things like missing Mass without a good reason, working on Sunday, receiving communion in a state of mortal sin, lack of faith, heresy, unbelief, atheism, and agnosticism, apostasy, leaving the faith entirely, using God's name in vain, failing to honor one's parents, drunkenness, voting for abortion, scandal, ignoring God, and living as if He did not exist, fornication, theft, including pirated software and things like pulling DVDs, movies off the internet, lying. There are a whole bunch of mortal sins that can send your soul to hell. And doesn't it at least seem like most people are guilty of at least one of these? I mean, it seems to me like when I see this list, most people commit these things on a regular, habitual basis. And moreover, they seem to die in that state. There aren't a whole lot of people in line at confession, you see, but there are a whole lot of people doing this. So think about that. How many people commit these sins on a regular basis, and how few go to confession? It really is overwhelming when you think about it. And I would also like you to consider this. The theologian I talked about earlier, Cornelius Lapide, he mentioned something called the rule of St Augustine, something that he pulled from the works of St Augustine that says, as a man lives, so he dies. As a man lives, so he dies. That is to say, that as a man lives in mortal sin, so he dies in that way as well. At least many, many people, it seems, die in a state of mortal sin. Now, maybe someone might say, well, maybe they're mysteriously saved, kind of like behind the scenes. After they die, you just don't really see it, but maybe a split second before they pass on, God kind of intervenes there and saves their soul. Yeah, that's possible. Sure, it's possible, but I don't see any good reason to think that that is actually happening. After all, Christ did warn us, quite frequently in fact, to watch, to be ready, for death could come like a thief in the night. So these kind of warnings, I think, are not consistent with unseen second chances. So I know it's true that we can't see a man's heart. We don't know a person's true motivations, what's going on inside someone's heart. But we do get a pretty good indication by their actions. That is to say, we can judge a tree by the fruit that it bears, and we can get a pretty good idea of what's going on inside someone's heart by the things that they do, you see. So I hope you can see this. I hope you can see that most men will be lost is the plain teaching of Scripture, the general consent of the fathers, and it seems to be, as we're saying here, confirmed by experience. And again, we have to judge things by the way that they appear. That's the only reasonable way to make judgments like this. So, this modern idea that, well, hell, it's just some kind of remote possibility, only people like Hitler go there, that goes entirely against the teaching of Jesus and the tradition as laid out by the greatest theologians, at least up until the 1960s. Now, just because we don't know for sure, and some people always want to bring this up, well, you don't know for sure. Yeah, I don't know for sure, but all we're saying here is this is where the evidence points. You see, all the evidence suggests that many are lost and few are saved. That is our entire point here. So I think we have established our thesis here that most people will be damned. Unfortunately, I think we have shown that this thesis is probably true.